Can see that we just got quorum. There we go. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Happy July. I can't believe it's already July. So I can confirm we do indeed have quorum, and currently absent from the meeting is Councillor Shaves, Councillor Oosterhoff, and Jessica Campbell and Sarah Riding. Those were the ones that gave me their regrets. Joining us from staff is myself, Derek O'Shea is our meeting host, and we also have Paul McGlatchy, who is the Environment Director, present. So with all that out of the way, happy to turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, to get the meeting started.
Great. I'm live here. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and thank you for your work on your committees. Look forward to hearing from the groups. The general plan for today will be that we'll obviously confirm the agenda and the minutes of the last meeting, and then we'll have presentations by the groups. Sorry, dog's here. And then yeah, I'll discuss that further when we get to it. So I guess first up is the agenda. Let me pull this up. So I'll need an approver of the agenda, which all of you should have received. I see anybody can approve the agenda for today.
Yeah, my hand up.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you. Reza will maybe get you to second that, and all those in favor of the agenda for today. Carried, thank you. Hopefully as well, you've all had a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting of April 13th. Did anybody have any additions or changes to the minutes of that meeting? Seeing none, I'll ask somebody to approve those minutes.
Mr. Chair, I see Mike Dakin has his hand up.
Thanks, Mike. I'm sort of scrolling back and forth, so thank you. And seconded. Oh, you're good. You're back on for the seconding. That's great. All those in favor of the minutes of our last meeting? And that's carried. Thank you. All right. Any pecuniary interest? I would think not.
No, Mr. Chair.
And any delegations or briefings?
There are none on this agenda, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we'll go to the business, which is the project team update for the State of the Environment report. As I discussed sort of briefly, the team leads will do a verbal presentation, and if you want to submit something after the fact to the clerk, they'd be happy to pass that on as well, but we'll do verbal reporting. And Rachel's group that were climate and biodiversity, Rachel unfortunately has got another meeting to attend. So my suggestion would be that climate number 2 and biodiversity number 4 would go first, and then air quality and water will go second, and then land and waste will go third. So unless anybody has anything that they want to change in that, I'll sort of hand it over to Rachel's group.
Thank you. I'm happy to start the conversation. Maybe I can just go through our main points, and then the group can add in anything that I may have missed, and then we can open it up to questions. So for biodiversity, that was the category we started with. The core metric that we were looking at there is potentially adding in more detail around green space, blue space, protected habitats, wetland, forest, hardscapes, and the vertical space. We had found some sources which we've been able to provide to the clerk around using either LiDAR or GIS planning. There's some examples that we've been able to provide in providing that in a total area, a percentage, and a per capita metric. So that's what we saw as being more inclusive and comprehensive in terms of biodiversity. If we're using that term biodiversity, we thought it was, more than just the number of trees, which was kind of, it's the metric that we have, but we thought we could have a better description of that. Secondary information, we had questions again around maybe tick population or pollinators in the statement or state of the environment for Ontario that Dave was able to share with us. They did explain the importance of pollinators. They were able to give data on one species of bees, and though that metric maybe wasn't, it didn't tell the whole story, it was part of the conversation and part of the information that was provided. In the commentary, we were thinking, defining biodiversity would be important as well, and clarifying what we mean by biodiversity. And if we can't add vertical data like the birds or the airspace to the core metric, adding this to the commentary to kind of reinforce the desire to collect this data eventually would be important. A lot of the conversation, to kind of skip to more like of a general question that we had, is just really reflecting on what the purpose of the state of the environment was. And we were really reflecting on it as, a place for people to come and get information, but also to highlight future action, right? And where we want to move to as well. And kind of a call to collect different data to improve the metrics over time. Anything else from the group to add in that one, to add more detail around?
Yeah, Josh, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. And this is not Rachel's fault. This is my fault. I had thought that we had also agreed on ecological corridor connectivity as part of that primary metric, which was going to be able to be assertion by the same use of the same data with the GIS. And the vertical, just to be clear, we were speaking about vertical complexity. So specifically trying to get at, a lawn is not the same as a series of trees or meadows, or are all different as far as biodiversity. And in the comment part of our slide, we made reference to 3 different papers that all provide the ways to actually measure those things using the GIS and LiDAR data. So the idea was, I'd like to add that in, that I had thought we were okay with or in agreement that we were going to do the ecological corridor connectivity as well as a primary metric.
Yeah,
but if somebody else
it in there, but yeah, I must have not have been clear in my presentation. So thanks for filling that in, but it is in the report.
Okay. And I guess, am I still live here? And yeah. I guess just as a clarification too, like what we're doing is putting presentations back to staff, and then staff can look into to see whether that data is fully available and whether it can be done. And so these are sort of suggestions that are going to go back to the staff, and not necessarily will be included, but will be certainly looked at, and staff will have the opportunity to research it more. Beth, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I took my hand down. Yeah, that was my thought as well, that we're providing this as, for consideration, and we understand, staff will have to take a look at it and see what the impact is on resources and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Carry on, Rachel.
Thank you. So the second category we talked about was climate. And the main thing that we talked about for this core metric was trying to provide the GHGs per capita. So again, just explaining the data in a different way per population, especially as growth happens very quickly here in Kingston, especially as of late. Other secondary data that we thought could be helpful to add was the greenhouse gases by sector from the community GHG inventory report. So we had found that in that report and have that in our deck that we've provided. We also didn't know if well records levels or dry ups would be relevant here or potentially in the water category. Just thinking more beyond the urban center, but also into the rural areas of the greater Kingston area. Potential measurements of drought, we didn't have any examples, but was something that could be relevant in this category as well. And burn ban days. So just another detail around heat, climate. We were looking, into air quality. I think we had met on the week just after we were experiencing a lot of the heavy smoke in the area. So that was definitely top of mind. And though that would probably fall in air category, we thought maybe the number of burn ban days that happen in the year could be considered around climate, and just those different regulations that are put in place or called for in the area because of heat or temperature or advisories. In general, for the commentary, we thought a comment on sequestration would be really beneficial in climate because that doesn't just happen with trees. And we talked at length about the role that soil has for carbon storage and having that as a part of the conversation, especially if this part of the purpose is maybe to serve as an informational tool for people. That can be helpful to note and for people to understand. And we noted some really beneficial secondary data sources like Invest or similar platforms, which Josh can correct me on this. I think it was at Princeton that you found that from. It was a really beneficial tool. So that was just a suggestion as it goes to staff of a place that they can start or potentially use.
Sorry, just to clarify, it's Stanford has an open source free Invest tool that allows you to put in data and get all kinds of interesting stuff. I was excited about it. You probably already know about it, Paul. I just thought I would bring it up.
Yeah, it was great to explore. And so a helpful reminder too. The one question we had was, we were talking about natural gas and electricity consumption per capita. I think it was included in one version that we had of the a draft statement of the environment, but then not in the newer one. So we were just wondering why maybe it wasn't included anymore. And that was the main topics that I had in general for climate. Anything to add from the group that I may have missed?
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a quick comment. Some really great suggestions here. I really appreciate them. With respect to a lot of the secondary metrics that are being discussed about climate, we can certainly add those to the State of the Environment report, I think. but they were deliberately left out because they're all available in the GHG emission inventory report. So anybody that wants to drill into all this secondary climate data can go there. But
Right.
I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I just wanted to let everybody know what the thinking was and why they weren't included when it's such a easily accessible chunk of data.
Right. And maybe that's a good opportunity to add a link for that within our statement of the environment, so that people can even more easily access it and not think that it was potentially left out. So we can kind of close that loop maybe.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Thanks.
And then in general, the questions that came up around the table was, who is this dashboard for exactly? Reading the aim and reading the initial introduction, we're looking to clarify, is it just for tracking, or is there supposed to be an element of a call to action? Again, we had kind of noted linking to existing community action plans or existing other sources of data, like Paul was mentioning there too, which could direct people in other ways if they're already interested in looking at the state of the environment. So there's some linkages that could happen. And then we were wondering what the plan for public input was too. This was stated as a goal, but we weren't really sure what the process was, what the engagement has been or will be, and what the purpose of using that information would be. Like how would that influence the report and what's included? Finally, we just noted that the conclusion says the state of Kingston's environment in 2021 and 2022 was generally healthy. We think that required further clarification. The definition maybe of what that means specifically, but given the evidence and the fact that, maybe there was a lot of influence around COVID restrictions and different habits, that, our general feeling was that this document should remain neutral, and that conclusion maybe isn't appropriate to say that it's generally healthy, especially if the purpose of the state of the environment is more for tracking and for information. Then to conclude that it's generally healthy maybe goes beyond the purpose of it and could be misleading. So our recommendation is that the document doesn't make a state on the health of the environment at the end, and it should remain neutral in its conclusion and just serve as tracking over time until we can really see those patterns through multiple collections. And that was the overall conversation that we had, and the rest of the group can add in any additional thoughts or questions from the larger group.
Great. Thank you very much. Very informed and thorough and well thought out and articulated. So that was great. Thanks. Does anybody have anything else to add or questions of that group? Yeah, Mr. McClatchy.
Just a quick question. I appreciate your recommendation with respect to the overall conclusions that are put forward. I think that's actually a great idea. But I'm wondering, how do you feel about conclusive statements made within each of these sort of metric sections? Because in some of the metric sections, we're actually comparing data to publish standards for, health and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Beth had really brought this up as a red flag for the statement of calling the environment generally healthy. So I wonder, Beth, do you have any thoughts on that? We'll put you on the spot.
I don't think it was me. I think it was Josh.
Oh, was it Josh? Okay.
Sorry.
We're
Yeah.
throwing the ball around.
Yeah.
I thought it was me, but
I actually think it was Diane as well.
Well, someone's taking
So
ownership.
Diane.
That's good.
I think that after reading the Ontario report, I don't even think in that report they give a conclusion about the overall state of the environment. I think that in the individual subject areas, perhaps there could be some comparison or some standards. But when you start to roll up all these little bits of information, it's really hard to come up with some type of a category, because the first question is, what standard did you use? What does healthy mean? I mean, there's a whole bunch of questions there that raises. So I think that within the individual sections, if there's enough data and if there's standardized processes and metrics, then if you're doing comparisons at that level, I think that might be quite valuable. But when you start to add up them all, I think that's where you start to get into a little bit of a conundrum, because, you know, what's the definition of healthy?
No, that's a good point. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's great. Anybody have anything else to add to this group or questions? Okay, that's great. So Rachel, if you need to go at any point, thank you for your input and appreciate your group's work on that. I'll ask somebody from air quality and water. Not sure who those individuals were.
Yeah, I can do that through you, Mr. Chair.
That would be great. Thank you, Mr. Dakin.
Yeah, so I'm just going to bring up my notes here. It was Ludmilla, myself, and Sarah who were part of this group. We had I felt, constructive conversation, put some notes together. I feel we benefited from our kind of collective experience. Sarah, particularly with regards to air quality, given her role at the KFLNA Public Health Unit, and then in terms of water quality, between Ludmilla, a private environmental consultant, myself working with the Conservation Authority, waters certainly, maybe we're not experts, but certainly within our area of interest and some expertise there. So we appreciate the ability to review and provide comments in these areas. So going right into it, with regards to air quality and the core metrics there. So looking at Air Quality Health Index from their Quality Ontario data, that is a core metric that we're supportive of. The note here from Sarah is that it's reliable, relevant, and easily accessible data. But at the same time, Sarah did make a note that we should acknowledge the limitation of this data. This single ambient air monitoring site for the entire city that's used is located at the Beach Grove Lane. I guess it's the provincial campus there on the southern, I guess the southern tip of the municipal boundary on Lake Ontario. So while it's all it exists right now, and because of that, it's certainly valid to use that data. Maybe looking forward and more broadly, you know, this location may not adequately represent air-to-air air quality for the entire municipality, given the diverse geography of and topography of the city. We expect that the monitoring site is influenced by weather conditions located in proximity to Lake Ontario. So something to note for now, definitely not within the scope of this group or likely Paul's work in setting up a new monitoring station. But, you know, if the opportunity ever came up, having a second one, perhaps in a different location would, for air quality purposes, would be beneficial. And otherwise, certainly a note or a qualifying statement, perhaps in the future reports about the limitations with that data. Yeah, looking at secondary metrics. If there's any questions, you'll just have to show, because I've got this document up in front of me, but happy to pause if there are any questions.
I'll keep track.
Thanks. Thank you. With regards to secondary metrics, we felt that I guess there was a question of why there was a need to differentiate between incidents of spills to air, incidents reported to the city and those reported to MECP through the Spills Action Center. Our understanding was that all the spills that are reported are go through the Ministry of the Environment, so it should be a single source there. But if that's wrong, then by all means, you can just correct me. But that there was a slight note on that there from Sarah. And then also on some of the secondary metrics, our working group supports the city's recommendation to discontinue the use of the acute care enhanced surveillance ACES data for respiratory related hospital admissions. Sarah notes here that the data does provide real-time analysis of hospital visits and admissions, which can be attributable to environmental causes, but this data is not appropriate as a retroactive source of air quality indications. So the recommendation is that the city consider collaborating, I guess, in the future with KFLNA to provide complete and accurate healthcare related data related to environmental causes, including, she notes, outdoor air quality. So that said, we agree with all the other recommendations put forward in the report as it relates to air quality. Moving on to water quality. So there's agreement by the three of us that the core metrics remain valid and are adequate for water quality, with a couple notes. The first being that the term beach closures is not technically correct, and Sarah was quick to point this out. The data that's reported by the health unit is actually for beach postings in instances where certain thresholds of E. coli are met. So it's not that actually beach closures, although that's what the outcome of those postings may be. It is actually just postings. So that's I think a minor revision. The use of blue-green algae events as a secondary metric, we really felt that there's merit in making that a primary metric. Again, reported blue-green algae events. I should specify not just reported, but confirmed. If we're confident and we're able to obtain data of confirmed blue-green algae events, that we felt should be a primary metric. It's a really good indicator for water quality, but not just all reported, as I'm sure Paul and others are aware. Many folks interpret or assume that certain algae events may be blue-green, but it's not always the case. They should be confirmed. So there was also note that all confirmed blue-green algae events within the municipal boundary be included. Right now, it looks like only those at municipal facilities are being reported. So that data should be available again for the entire municipal boundary, not just municipal facilities. This is a comment that was made, I think, the last State of the Environment report, and one that just carries forward, and I think it is one that Paul and his team are working towards. But getting the municipality getting their hands on the provincial ground and surface water quality monitoring data, that would be useful as a primary metric. So, for example, the Cataraqui Conservation, we sample surface water and groundwater at a number of locations in the municipal boundary as part of these two monitoring networks, both groundwater and surface water. And some of the important characteristics or metrics that we look at include chloride, dissolved oxygen, phosphorus, again, some key indicators there for overall water quality. So if we, as a conservation authority, can help in connecting the city to that data, we're happy to do that. And looking at secondary metrics, so we were in agreement that municipal water use per capita is not necessarily the greatest indicator for water quality, so that could be removed, we felt. There's a note here that data from the Ministry of Health's Drinking Water Advisory Reporting System might be a good secondary metric. So that's, again, that's the Drinking Water Advisory Reporting System. It appears to be available from the Ministry of Health, so that would be a good secondary metric, as I said. And I think lastly on water quality, this is a comment that was made previously, and then also one that was reflected in Paul's report, just removing the water level data from the the water quality section, and perhaps moving that to climate or somewhere else. It's a better, I think, indicator of those categories. And then just a final suggestion. I think this aligns a little bit with Rachel's comment about linking the reporting and the findings of the state of the environment to actual actions, tangible actions that residents can take. I think we think the state of the environment report is really an opportunity that we can educate and point to easy, I mean, nothing's ever easy, but to practical actions and even just resources where folks can learn more. So whether that's section by section, providing a few links and notes, or in a kind of conclusion section, we're happy to make that recommendation and look forward to future versions where that sort of thing can be included. Anybody else from my group? I guess Ludmila, did I miss anything, or do you think I covered most of it? Good. Okay, so
yeah, you cover everything. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So we have these in writing, and we'll pass them through if they haven't already. Hopefully they make them to Paul. And in the meantime, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Anybody have any questions? Paul's got some, maybe many. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Mike. That was really excellent. With respect to the provincial groundwater and surface water data, great idea. I think we would probably be looking to have yourself and maybe Dave help us identify, what sampling stations are probably the best ones to use as being representative, because there's a lot of them, and as you know, some of them start and stop over time.
Right.
I appreciate the suggestion, and hopefully you can help us do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll make a note of that. And we also, I just coming to my mind right now, I didn't think of this while we were preparing these notes, but we've started in the last couple of years focusing on thermal classification as well in some of the water courses. And there's a good kind of equal distribution across the watershed, especially in the Kingston area. So maybe we'd include that as well if there's interest.
Thanks.
Yep.
Sounds great. Any other questions for this group? Okay, I guess I'm up. Jaka and Reza and I met and looked at land and waste. And again, like Mike's group, I really appreciated the expertise that was within our group, and that knowledge that they could bring forward to these subjects. I guess starting out in general, we felt that the State of the Environment report and the graphs in particular were a little bit simple, and also were at times really hard to read, some of the data points. And so I think that could be improved in future iterations. I think they need to be sort of similar and presented in a way that brings people in, and so I think a bit more work could be done in that area. And maybe in general too, the write-up tended to be in this iteration fairly technical. And again, maybe that's speaking to who this State of the Environment report is addressed to, and what they might be able to, who we might be able to engage. So I think if it became more of a simplified point by point, sort of less technical report, I think it might engage more people and might have maybe even some better uptake in things that people could do in each of the areas. We also felt that, and I think we mentioned this in the initial meeting that we had on the report, was it'd be great if we had some sort of comparative city that could be included, that would be of similar size and population to Kingston. I know that there isn't always that exact version, but I think the Ontario report had some different areas that we could sort of compare ourselves to. So that was kind of just general statements. On land, I think it was Jacob said that there's an on-site excess soil management Ministry of the Environment unit that is they're monitoring excess soils that are being transferred or used within the city or transported out of the city if there's a certain sort of size. And so that we thought was a good metrics that might be able to be used for land. And it was sort of in large construction sites where they're either taking soil out or bringing soil in, and it's monitoring what that any contaminants that might be in that soil. And so we're not sure if that might be a good metric and should be at least investigated as a potential for seeing what the soils are like that we're moving into the city or out of the city. So that was something, and we've got more details that we'll put in a report, or Paul will get that report. I guess I should sort of say, Jacob, do you have anything you want to add to that? I think you're here now.
Yeah, I think in the nutshell, maybe like David knows this like the best with the new excess soil requirements effective this year, David. The idea is just like to have a secondary matrix that if the province can share the information with the municipalities, it might be good to highlight to the public like how much soil was like exported out of Kingston, or the volume of low impacted soils like being reused, like recycled in a way to like appropriate land use. I think it would be good to highlight it to the public. That's just like my idea about it.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. In the waste section, we thought one of the secondary metrics that's written is about, it's called material recovery facility, but then in the write-up, it turns into waste contamination rate. So there's some confusion with us about which one of those two things is the actual metric, and we just need to sort of be consistent with the terminology within that area. The other one that we thought it needed a bit more clarification was the illegal dumping. We had a huge increase in the number of illegal dumps that happened in 2020 and 2021, and just wondering if we know why that might have happened. Do citizens know where they should be taking housewares and furniture and other waste things? Just wondering if anybody had any, it was just such a huge increase that we sort of didn't know what was going on with that. The other thing that we've also talked about in our first meeting on the state of the environment was with regards to solid waste. So it's a bit unusual that there's nothing in the state of the environment about Kingston solid waste dumping and volumes. And I know it gets confusing because some of it goes out and it goes to different spots, and we really don't have our own landfill. But I think not mentioning something about that is unusual, and we need to probably bring that in. And even if we use provincial data of length of time that we have with landfills, it might encourage people to put less into those dumps if they know that there's a finite limit to the amount of time that those are there. And where is it going, and any volumes that we could share, and also what's being monitored on those landfills. Is there any degradation? Is there leachate that's coming out of them? What's happening with that? So those were the areas that we thought about. Jacob, do you have anything to add to that waste section? I know this is something you had interest in and expertise in. Oh, sorry, Reza.
Thanks, David. I think you covered the majority of the issues. Only I would like to add is that, we discussed the issue of how many more years to dump in Kingston landfills before they will get full. The reason we discussed this issue was that we read from the statement, the State of the Environment report for Ontario, and there was a scary number in there saying that the current landfills of Ontario have got only capacity to receive municipal solid waste from different cities for only 13 years. So theoretically, to me, that means after 13 years, there will be no place to dump or MSW, municipal solid waste, at least for the time being. However, I think for Kingston, we need to know, and citizens might be interested to know, how many landfills do we have in the city, and what's the overall containment capacity of those landfills, and maybe as a secondary metric, to be aware of the number of more years that those landfills could survive, could contain or waste. I think this is something which came from Ontario State of the Environment report.
Thank you. Anybody have any other questions of either us or in general? Okay, that's great.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I believe Diane has her hand up.
There she is. Oh, she doesn't have the handy hand. She's got her actual hand up. Go ahead, Diane. I think you need to be unmuted.
There. For some reason, it wasn't doing it, but just a comment maybe about the usefulness of a diversion rate as a percentage without the overall total. The diversion rates are a percentage of the total, and you can have 60% diversion rates, but it could be 60% of a large number or 60% of a small number. So I guess when I read this, it didn't give me necessarily an accurate appreciation for the totals that we're sending, the total waste generated for the city. So I'm just wondering if that came up in the waste discussion at all, that, you know, a percentage is a percentage, but it has far more meaning when you know what it's a percentage of.
Yeah, I think that's what we meant when we said that there's no solid waste data there. And so if there's no solid waste data, you're quite correct. Then we don't know if our diversion is 60% of 100 or 60% of a million.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's just unusual that data is not there.
Agreed. Yeah. And the other thing is, was there any discussion about having a per capita, like as the population increases in Kingston, you would expect every person that lives in Kingston uses energy and generates waste. So you would think that a per capita metric might be useful for people to see, to try and get their individual waste down and diversion rate up. And if you did have a per capita, then it would be much easier to compare Kingston's waste generation and diversion to any other city, you know, comparable size city like Barrie. If you standardize on per capita, then it's fairly easy to do that.
Yeah. No, we did discuss that, and Reza brought that up, that without knowing that total, because you can speculate, and I think he had a number, and I won't sort of say it out loud because I'm not sure what it was, but it's an expected per capita amount of solid waste and recyclable waste that you could expect, and are we at that expectation or not? I think would be good.
And the other thing that struck me is that the pandemic clearly must have had an impact on waste with all of the PPE that people were burning through. And I take it that because some of it would be biomedical waste, that it wouldn't be captured in any of this reporting. Is that right? This is just residential waste generation?
Paul could probably speak to that more specifically, but that's my understanding, is that we don't have a very strong understanding of industrial and commercial waste streams.
If it got thrown out into people's household garbage, then you'd pick it up, but everything else is not on anybody's radar.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely work to be done in that area, but and could be very positive too, right? Like I think if we all could sort of see that, you know, you can put out one small little bag of garbage, and we don't need 2 tags per household. So encouraging that decrease would be great. Beth.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. I think, you know, the per capita, it can be a bit challenging because I think the census data doesn't take into account our student populations. So that's something that then has to be estimated, because, that's quite a jump. So, you know, maybe if you compare Kingston to another community that doesn't have such a student population, we may look poorly in comparison if we don't take that into account.
Point noted. Any other comments? Seeing none, I guess we'll
Mr.
move.
Chair, Jacka had his hand up.
Thank you. Sorry, Jacka.
Yeah, I just have a question with regard to the lack of data with the industrial and commercial. Is there no municipal regulation that require them to kind of like keeping a tab and report to the municipality how much waste they generated or being disposed of by private contractor? is it possible to have like something in discussion to kind of like have that regulation for reporting purposes?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is no municipal requirement for ICI waste reporting, unfortunately. And as far as I know, there's no provincial requirement either. So I don't believe it's really being tracked. You asked whether or not it's possible for there to be a municipal bylaw or something that requires that kind of data reporting. I suppose it's probably possible. Whether or not it's feasible, I'm not sure. I'm happy to ask the question to the licensing and bylaw department of the city. They would oversee that.
I think in the past too, Paul, maybe the Queen's representative and RMC representative might have been willing to share some of that data. Am I remembering that at some point, that they do track some of those things and might be willing to share more on a voluntary basis than a regulatory basis, some of those institutions?
I'm not sure, David. I don't recall. But I mean, there are some progressive and civic-minded organizations in our city, and I'm sure they're tracking their waste and so forth diligently and might be willing to share that.
Just a point. Any other questions? Any other hands up?
Beth Sills does have her hand up, Mr. Chair.
Then I will say hi, Beth.
I was just going to comment. So I work for an institution, and we're required to report to the province through wrap-up. But interestingly, it's only our recyclables that we're to report on. They don't ask for our waste numbers. So it's kind of interesting they don't ask for it.
Yeah. All right. Seeing no other questions, and through you, Mr. Clerk, I believe we have no motions or notices of motions or other business or correspondence. Would that be true?
That is true, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to confirm to everyone, I do have a very nice long list of notes here that will be turned into the minutes as well, but I'm also happy to share them off to Mr. McGlatchy to supplement his own notes that he's been taking. And I will also forward the emails I received from all three groups containing their information, the written information, and their images and everything that they provided to me as well tomorrow morning, so that he can have all the information from all the groups, and we can get cracking on the stuff that we've discussed here this afternoon.
Okay, that'd be great. As noted in the agenda, the date of the next meeting is to be determined by the clerk. He'll be in touch. So I'd ask for someone to...
Oh, I do believe, sorry, just before we adjourn, I think Paul has his hand up.
Oh,
I'm
Paul,
sorry.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Thanks very much. And through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to express my thanks to everybody for doing such a good chunk of work. It's a really impressive deep dive into this, and I know it's frustrating to deal with data when data sometimes isn't even available, and you're constrained by the criteria by which we pick our metrics. But I just wanted to say thank you for a job well done. It's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think I'll speak for the group and say that we enjoyed diving into that. So that was good for our first little foray into the Keefe. So that's great too. So I'll ask someone to put their hand up to adjourn the meeting. Diane, thank you. Seconded. I'll second it. No, where did Ludmilla go? Got to put your hand up. She's not there. Okay.
I saw Reza raise his hand there, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that's great. Okay, all those in favor. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good night.